to be recorded. So if you don't want to feature in that recording, please feel free to turn off your video. And also, if you could kindly just mute your microphones, that would help me very much to present. This lunchtime series came about as a way of informing and also kind of just connecting the research unit and the policy and advocacy position and Graham and Yuffie's work a little bit to the broader organization. So we're hoping to get a bit more popular, but also kind of connect with everyone in a way that's both interesting and educational, and also just helps us do a lot of the work that we're doing already. If you have any questions, there will be time at the end for questions. So it's a 20-minute presentation and there's 10 minutes for questions. Feel free to either pop your questions in the chat, or just when I'm done speaking, you can put those forward. I've noticed a couple of people, well, you can see it's recording, so just a reminder, it is being recorded and you do not have to have your video if you do not want to. And I might just wait for a minute to allow some late arrivals to participate. Is there anything that you want to add, Graham? Sorry, I probably should have asked you that before.
Oh, no, thank you, Paula. Other than this will be an ongoing series, and to Paula's point about the introduction and the engagement to bring people up to speed on what developments are taking place, particularly in a time such as now when we're all still we're a bit disconnected due to COVID. And then there are opportunities for future discussions or presentations that could be held, and that is through feedback, as articulated in your invitation. And there was also a preference link in there within the invitation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I did forget to say, if anyone has any ideas for any presentations that they would like, to please forward them to me. And I probably will just begin. And the title of today's presentation is "Why is Data So Important?" And before I delve into that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm presenting from today. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may be present here today in this presentation. Why is data so important? As a researcher, I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that I have a special passion for data, but I think more broadly, we've all kind of become accustomed to this idea of data. I think words like big data, demographic data, personal data, sensitive data are part of our common vocabulary. And I think that more and more it's becoming really pressing that we focus on how we go about using that data, but also how we collect it. So, oh, hang on. Okay. I thought I'd start by answering a common question: why do we collect data? And I thought it'd be interesting to, rather than talk about our organization, talk about the Australian Bureau of Statistics, one of my favorite bureaus. And this is information that I pulled from their website. And obviously they collect data to create statistics about people. And the point of that is that they inform decision making. And this is really the most important feature of the data that any organization collects. Core statistics are used by business, the community, and government to plan, to make decisions, to develop services and infrastructures, to decide funding. We've all noticed how COVID has impacted not just what gets funded, but how it gets funded, and the idea of funding being based on demographic and where the need is really important. The ABS does integrate their data, so they obviously collect data throughout the census. It's a census year, by the way. I didn't know that until yesterday, so Everyone get ready. And they also use their data to have longitudinal studies and determine how populations have changed. And this is really important because one of the things that we've learned through COVID is just how rapidly things can change. And we all have a feeling of change being a thing that happens really quite quickly. But when things settle down, we actually need evidence to show what's changed and how it's changed. And finally, the ABS states that they use personal information that's collected outside of the census, because sometimes we do that. We collect information that's a little bit outside of our standard forms to help them run the census. And so ultimately, I think the important takeaway from that is that there's always a reason that underlines why we ask the questions that we ask and what we're asking for. You'll have access to the presentation and things are hyperlinked, so I encourage you to like explore those if you love the ABS as much as I do. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm having issues with the transition. And so then we have this this form, and you are all familiar with it. You've all seen it. We made some changes to it after my arrival in late 2019. Every time I look at this form, I'm somewhat daunted by the amount of information that's there. And I recognize that those questions don't just seem lengthy, but potentially might seem somewhat intrusive, or are questions that we're perhaps not used to asking. And so just before I got to the other end of my question, or to answer my question as to why we're collecting this information, I kind of wanted to just run us through the state of our data. And I'd like to thank Kelly for her help and her input. She's developed some demographic reports, and what you see, what you're going to see now is accurate as of yesterday. This is very small on my screen, so I apologize because I'm going to lean into the video right now. But what I wanted to start with was some general demographic data. So here we have a screen grab of marital status and concession cards, and you can see these amazing pie charts and graphs, and it's all really good. But you'll also note that there are these little like symbols next to the fields that are blank. Some of the blank fields are really small, like 6.4% has a blank marital status, but we have 53.2% of missing fields for concession cards. And obviously for a service that's based on providing social services, that's a pretty big gap. And it's really important for someone like me to actually have that information, because the general kind of financial state of the people that we service is a really important part in our decision-making process, but also in advocating for funding for specific services that we might need. Also, because it's June, and while this is just a US thing, it's Pride Month, I thought I'd also focus on Better Pride. So happy Pride, everyone. It's similarly to what we have in the general service, we have here for Better Pride. So you can see there's a Better Pride client. The yes has been checked, so that means that this data is specific to them. And you can see there we have also some blank information. The data that was captured, I've made sure that these are for our clients that are actually active and have had sessions or events, if I remember correctly. So these are not people that just have contacted us and then never came to a service. And it also excludes the NDH line, which is a somewhat different service that we provide and has different data collection mechanisms. So you can see there's also some blank information. We're moving now to safety and intervention orders. Now, we work in a space that requires us to be really good with safety. And unfortunately, we have some blank bits here as well. And the push that we've seen, especially from the Victorian government, to include more information in our risk assessment processes is a really important part of what we do. More and more, we understand that we can make better risk assessments if we have more information. And while I recognize that the alignment with MARAM is not necessarily something that's either happened in a way that is either clear or smooth or even somewhat logical at times, it's still really important that we understand that as a wider sector, we are all moving towards more information allows us to make better decisions about people's safety, and that is especially important when we're dealing with people that have been subjected to violence. In terms of, just as by way of informing, Better Pride, again, we still also have some blanks. In terms of cultural and linguistic diversity, we have to recognize that we do have a diverse client base, and that it's an important part of us tailoring our services and recognizing that different cohorts have different needs for us to have this information. And again, you'll see here, there are some blanks in that information. So that makes it very hard for us to know exactly how to better suit those services for communities that are arguably structurally disadvantaged and oppressed by broader systems that historically exclude them and that disregard their needs because of the push for mainstreaming. So this information is important because it makes us more inclusive, it makes us more welcoming, and it's a part of being just more welcoming to clients that would otherwise potentially fall through the cracks. And I think COVID has highlighted that as well. Similarly, we have, for Better Pride, culturally and linguistic diversity, we have some fields missing as well. And education, employment, and income. Now, I think for a service like ours, these are really big kind of data points that we need to know and understand. We know that both employment, education, and a stable income are protective factors for people. That means obviously that, you know, having all of those things should ensure a better quality of life. But if we don't have that information there, then that's going to make it hard for someone like me to advocate for more funding for, you know, things like universal basic income, or to extend Centrelink benefits to people, or to improve the amount of money that people receive, because we know that Centrelink payments have built-in poverty into them. So we need this information, and it's a really important part of the work that we can do more broadly within not just the direct client service, but rather as an agent of change for people that require that. This one is always an interesting one. We have age, gender, and sexual orientation. I think these are really important for us, not just because we have now a Better Pride service and we're trying to be inclusive and there's hopes for Rainbow TIG and all of that, but because we do know that age, gender, and sexual orientation can be barriers to entry for services for people. And I do note that the historical collection of this data has been somewhat problematic. I think that we still have notions that are somewhat outdated, perhaps, around asking people, especially around their sexual orientation. And I would just like to take a moment to say, I will talk about that in a second, but also to say that all of the research points to the fact that it is much better to ask questions than not ask them, because the responsibility of having to disclose information, whatever that may be, leaving that only to clients generates considerable amounts of anxiety and stress. And so it's much easier for people to just answer a standard set of questions, to then have to wonder whether or not they're going to have to disclose that information either at that point or somewhere down the track. So it's not just about data collection. It's also about improving everyone's quality of life by reducing the anxiety that accessing services and the questions associated to it might generate. We have the Better Pride section here as well. And the fact that we have 26.9% of a blank field for sexual orientation for a service that is specifically designed for LGBTIQA plus people, for me is a bit of a concern, because how are we actually ensuring that we're servicing that community properly if we don't actually know, well, if they belong to the community or if they're attached to the community by way of family, chosen family, biological family, or just generally an ally, because all of those things are important in determining and tailoring how we provide our services. So that's just a general kind of like landscape of what our data status is. And I would also like to say this is the start of a broader conversation. And if there's anything that anyone wants to send my way or tell me, I am very happy to receive that either via email or Teams calls or whatever. But I would like to start a broader conversation around data and data management. So I would also like to just take a moment to talk about language. And to note that language is inclusive when we use words in ways that demonstrate our respect for how people describe themselves, whether that's their own genders, bodies, or their relationships. And that it's really important to show this respect, even when we are describing people who are not present. Researchers have found that how we are described by others has an enormous impact on our health and well-being. And I think we would all know that from providing services or being involved in this sector. And on how likely we are to seek healthcare when necessary. And specifically for the LGBTIQA community, a single negative experience can mean that they will not seek help in future. So once is enough to basically predispose or determine help-seeking behaviors in future for the rest of their life. And that's a really important thing to remember, because I don't think anyone here wants to be that one negative experience that meant that someone is not going to seek the help that they need in future. So how do we actually make this better? The importance of accurate demographic data. Now, I know it might seem counterintuitive to think that more data is actually the way to go. It's not the only way, but it is definitely one of the ways. And it's, as you'll see the references here, but it says it's common for service providers to believe that services are inclusive because they enforce the policy of treating everyone the same. We would all know that that's actually not how justice works. Justice requires us to adapt things to the either individual or group needs of whoever we're working with. So the approach of treating everyone the same overlooks the social and cultural determinants of health for LGBTIQ communities and the numerous barriers that these clients experience when accessing mainstream services. So when data collection practices don't allow clients to accurately record their sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, it can lead to LGBTIQA people being invisible to service providers. And I'm sure we've all had instances of providing a service to a person that belongs to the community and we really didn't have a clue. And it's not always necessary to know, but sometimes that might be an important part of how we provide service. And it's also a really important part of how we project our service into the future. So having this accurate data not only helps people immediately, but it also helps us improve our services for the future. The other big thing is data and bias. Bias is common. It's a thing that happens. It's about our neurobiology. It's how our brains work, and it's a quick and dirty way to group information. But bias becomes a problem when it's based either on incorrect information or it's based on like passed on prejudice. Now, I've listed some biases here. I think what the biases that are important for us, or maybe for me, I'm not sure, is heterosexist bias. So conceptualizing human experience in strictly heterosexual terms and ignoring or invalidating LGBTQA experiences. So the idea that whenever we have a client, we make assumptions about their sex, their gender identity, or their relationships. Affinity bias, the idea that we warm up to people like ourselves, and confirmation bias, which is pretty common. So looking for information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. And the message that I want to give is that accurate data helps us overcome many of our unconscious biases. And that's really important because we don't really know what we don't know until we have the evidence. So as a takeaway message, I would just like to emphasize these things. Data is fundamental in our decision-making processes at every level. That accurate data helps us overcome many forms of unconscious bias, that it's everyone's responsibility to ensure that data is up to date and accurate. And I would just like to leave you with a question around how can we all individually contribute to better data management? And that's just part of this broader conversation that I'm hoping to start at every level. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. Now I will open it to questions. I note that there are a whole heap of questions in the chat. Okay. Sorry, I'm having, okay. A dictionary of appropriate language. Yes, that's very easy to do. I'm very happy to share some resources. Sorry. There are guides. Yes, there are guides. Okay. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through all of these. Yeah, rainbow tick guides, language guides, mental health guides, absolutely. Can I go through the biases again? Yes, I can go back to that slide. These are just common biases that we all have, and that tend to be related to our idea of groups and like how groups behave and individually. The gender bias. Gender bias is probably also a big one in the social services sector, because we tend to put explanations for people's behaviors that are actually related to our preconceived notions of gender. And an interesting way of changing that is actually looking at what the behavioral patterns are of people based on their gender, and we can do that through our data collection processes as well. Okay, I'm sorry, there are some hands. Adam and someone else.
Sure, I'll ask verbally if it helps.
Yes.
So, so I went to a training session around unconscious bias in product development, which is a problem across the community, but also in how developers build products, things like forms, obviously content, and obviously applications that we use day to day. And the training was really useful for me in terms of opening up my eyes in terms of a lot of the biases that I wasn't conscious of. And it wasn't until the story was demonstrated in a small piece where everyone was asked to have a read of a paragraph that described a situation, and we were asked to basically decide, I think, from a set of options what was the best course of action or what it was describing. And almost everyone chose something that revealed an underlying bias that we had around the gender of the person, and some of these hierarchical things that everyone was like, oh my god, this is something that we just didn't realize was there until it's painted. So maybe some something we can look at in terms of additional training for us to ensure that we understand what these different biases mean and how to check ourselves around that?
Yeah, there's thank you. There's considerable materials. Was it that example about there's a father and his son in an accident, and then they get taken to hospital, and the attending doctor says, "Oh, I can't operate on this child. They're mine." Yeah, that's a pretty common example. But yes, I'm happy to look at some materials and examples of how those work. I think that there's a lot of publicly available information. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that for sure. Thanks. Catherine, you have your hand.
Hi, everybody. Yes, look, I posted a bit of just a comment right at the beginning, just about the concession card blanks that you were getting on your data. And I've just put in the question there, because there's 3 different options there, and then there is a blank to choose, of course, if someone doesn't have a concession card. I'm just wondering if that's skewing the data, as in it looks like maybe people haven't filled that in, but really the client doesn't have a concession card. So there's not like an NA or a none available for choice. Is that skewing your data with that point?
That's a really good question. I don't actually have an answer for that, but I'll definitely look into it, because if there's no not applicable option, then yes, that would definitely be skewing the data. Yes.
And I think in the chat, Natasha has suggested that too. So thanks, Natasha.
Yeah. Thank you. Serge, you have your hand up.
Yep. Hi. And firstly, well done. This is a great session, and I love this initiative. And thank you all for coming along. It's a great turnout. So excellent. I'm just following up on what Catherine asked. I'm wondering. I'm really keen to understand why the data isn't filled in. So I think you make an excellent point. We need the data. There are a myriad of reasons which we don't need to go into, but you know, from a safety perspective, it's essential. And we have developed, thanks to Kelly and Craig and yourselves, excellent systems for reporting. We've spent considerable amount of time, money, and resources into developing our systems. And I think, you know, I love it when I see those pie charts and graphs, and they look amazing. But if we don't have the data inside our system, they're not worth much. So I suppose, how do we get to understand why people aren't filling it in? Now, there may be legitimate reasons, and Catherine mentioned one. So there may be real practical things that the practitioners could tell us as to why data isn't being completed, or how we can make it easier. So I'm wondering whether we can gather that feedback from practitioners somehow, and try and get a better understanding as to what are the barriers, what are the blocks. Is it just people forget? Is the process too hard? Are there too many ticks? So not to answer now, Paula, but I think it's something that we should somehow get that feedback from, because kind of Catherine kind of prompted me to think, well, maybe there are other things that are creating this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was saying this is part of a broader conversation. I just want to like start stirring that pot. But absolutely, if there are any ideas or comments or just things that you've noticed, please send them my way, because yeah, there's always room for improvement. And we can always do things in a way that's more effective and efficient, and actually more in line with what both practitioners and clients need. So yes, absolutely, we'll be looking into that. And I also, just because I've never used this presentation format before, realized that there was one slide that I hadn't actually shown you, which is a bit of a side note. There's this really good webinar happening on the 23rd of June. It's hyperlinked here, and it's around understanding coercive control, which is just one of my things that I'm really into getting out there. So I highly recommend for anyone or everyone, if you just want to either start looking at what the impact of coercive control is, or if you just want to deepen your knowledge. And like I said, these presentations will be available, so you can just click on the hyperlink and it'll take you to the registration. And I think that's it. Thank you everyone for coming to the inaugural lunchtime series. I appreciate it. I appreciate your attention. And oh, thank you. Doing this over a screen is definitely not the same as doing it in person. So I appreciate you all being here, and we shall see you in a fortnight. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.